In this video, I'm going to show you something that 99% of colorists overlook, but the best in the game know it's the difference between loving your grade from the very first adjustment versus struggling with every shot. It's called a DRT, and even if you already know what a DRT is, stick around because I'm going to show you how, used to its full potential, your DRT is way more than just a starting point. In fact, it can be your single biggest asset in your grades. Okay, two quick things before we get started. Number one, everything that we're going to talk about today depends on you having a basic understanding of color management in Resolve as I teach it here on the channel. So if you haven't had a chance to learn those basics or you need a refresher, check out the video that I'm going to link you to right now. I promise it's going to make this conversation a lot easier and a lot more fun. Number two, it's way more important that you follow along with the concepts that I'm going to give you today than that you follow along with me in Resolve. So I'm actually going to recommend putting your keyboard and mouse down and grabbing a pen and paper, because what I'm going to give you today is the playbook, the foundations that are going to give us the when, the where, the why, the how of the way that we use DRTs in Resolve to get the strongest possible color grades. Okay, ready to dive in? Let's go. So if we're going to talk about DRTs, we got to start by talking about something that I call the print. What is the print? Let me give you a definition. The print is any adjustments that happen after our grade at the macro level. Let's break that down. Let's look at what that looks like practically here in this project. So here at my clip level of my node graph, I've got some light grading going for this shot, right? What I now want to look at is the timeline level of my node graph. If I go over to here, the timeline level of the node graph, there are a couple of things that are true about the timeline level of the node graph. First of all, any node, any adjustment, anything that I do here at the timeline level of the node graph is going to affect all of the shots in the timeline, not just some of the shots, right? That makes it macro level by definition. Secondly, this timeline level of my node graph and anything that I place in it is automatically going to happen after, in terms of node flow, node order, image process. It's going to happen after anything that I did at the clip level, okay? So if I describe the print as a set of macro adjustments that happen after my grading is done, the timeline is going to satisfy both of those conditions automatically, right? This isn't the only place you can put a print, but it's a very sensible place to put our print as a result of what I just said, and the fact that here we are automatically doing things macro level and after our clip level grades, okay? And you can see my print, in this case, has two ingredients. I've got a look. This look is coming from my look development plugin, Contour, and it's imparting the creative or the preferential aspect of my print, okay? The second component is my DRT. My DRT is providing the technical component, the technical mapping from my working color space out to my display color space. These two things combine together to form our print. This is the thing that is responsible for putting our image on the screen. With this turned off, there's not much of anything to look at. We can kind of see what it is an image of, but it's really more like data than an image. You can think of this in the old school film sense that is even more exaggerated, where until you print something with film, everything is a negative. It's literally upside down. You can't even sort of see what's happening unless you develop a very odd skill of being able to invert color and tonality automatically in your brain. But you really can't see it in the case of film, but it's the same principle here. This is not really a meaningful image. It's more like data than an image. What makes it an image? It's our print, right? Another great way to think about this, think of color grading as baking. If color grading is baking, then our print is the oven. The oven is the thing that takes the combination of ingredients that we've made, whatever assembly and putting together of things that we've done thus far. I don't bake, by the way, so I'm doing a terrible description of the baking process probably, but it's the thing that takes all the skill that we've applied thus far and actually turns it into something we can eat, right? Same thing with this image. The print is what takes our skill that we've applied thus far. Remember, our grade is still happening right now. It's just happening over here. And it's doing something, it's just not doing enough, right? So the print is where we take all of that skill that we've applied thus far and we actually render the image with it. It is the oven of our colorist bakery, okay? Now that we understand the print and the concept of it and the components of it, by the way, we are generally in a modern color managed workflow going to have a two-step print like the one that we're looking at right now, where we are using a technical mapping, a DRT, along with a creative look, and they're going to combine to form our print. This won't always be the case, as we're going to see later, but this will often be the case in a modern color managed workflow. We're going to have a two-step print. Now that we understand this print as a concept, let's dive back into the DRT and understand that a little bit better. So first of all, like DRT, what does that even mean? What is a DRT? In this context, DRT is display rendering transform. Okay. It's literally what takes us from our working color space and transforms us out to our display color space. Okay. DRT can go by a lot of different names. It's sometimes called an ODT, sometimes called a CST, although CST can describe more than one thing, but oftentimes we'll say, oh, that's my CST. And what we really mean is a color space transform like this one that's mapping us out to our display specifically. Okay. So ODT, output transform, CST, all similar terms to describe fundamentally the same thing. Another one that may not always mean the same thing, but that people will often use to mean a DRT is your LUT or your viewing LUT. And we're going to see a little bit later today how a viewing LUT essentially can function as a DRT, but that's serving the same role. It is getting you from your working space out to your display space. So these are different overlapping terms that fundamentally can be used to refer to the same thing, which is how are you technically mapping from your working space out to a display space? You get it. Okay, so let's now talk about the things we need to understand about a DRT in order to use them well. The cool part is, guys, if you're with me thus far, there's really only 4 things we need to understand about DRTs to start using them in an empowered way and getting the very best out of them, the very most out of them in our color grades. The first of those is that the DRT plays an outsized role in the print. What do I mean when I say that? Well, let's think about this for a second. Now we know what a print is, right? We know that a print has these 2 components that combine to form a single asset, the print, right? Or a single process. When I say that the DRT plays an outsized role in the print, here's what I'm talking about. Let's go and get a fresh album going here. And I want to pull up some fresh images. So let's go over here and we're just going to do a quick experiment. In our first experiment, we're going to have our look only. Look, no DRT, okay? In our second experiment, we're going to have our DRT only. DRT, no look. Now we're going to wipe between these. So if you could only have one, you cannot have both. You can only have one component of your print. Which one are you going with? I'm going DRT every single time, right? Like this may not have all that nice creative shape that I had a moment ago, but at least it's putting pixels on the screen that look like some kind of something, right? This looks like not much. This looks like that sort of characterization that I was making earlier of like something that looks more like data than a finished image. This would be a tough position to grade from. There would be a lot more work for me to do here than there is here. So that's what I mean when I say the DRT plays an outsized role in the print. And it may be only 2 steps in a normal modern color managed printing process, but the DRT plays a very large role in that process. So it's critical that we understand it and then we select the right DRT for the right job. Okay, so the DRT plays an outsized role in the print. Next thing we need to understand, DRTs are not neutral. Now that may sound very confusing based on what we've talked about thus far, because we talked earlier about how DRTs are providing the technical component and your look is providing the creative component, right? But it gets a little bit less cleanly divided than that in practice. Let me show you an example of this. So I'm going to go to my other gallery that I have here, and we're going to flip between some ACES renderings. This is not an ACES video. I'm in fact not even grading in ACES, but I am going to use 2 ACES DRTs. One is from the brand new release of ACES 2.0, in which the biggest change is that they updated their DRT. We're going to flip between the ACES 2.0 DRT and the previous generation ACES 1.3 DRT. I've got these mapped and set up properly for my color management framework, and they're going to show us something very interesting. Check this out. This is ACES 1.3. And in all cases, guys, I've got this same exact look in line. It is not changing in any of the examples that we're going to look at today. It is our constant so that we can compare apples to apples when it comes to the DRT itself. So this is the same look running into ACES 1.3. Here is that look running into ACES 2.0. That's quite different, right? Different on the scopes, different feel in the image, different highlight shape, very, very different renderings of image, right? What gives with that? If you're telling me, Cullen, that a DRT is responsible for technically mapping from working space to display space, shouldn't they all look the same? Shouldn't it be enough to simply have a DRT in a color managed workflow without being so concerned about which DRT? Here's the thing. Here's the analogy that I like to give. Think about the job that we're asking our DRT to do. We are asking our DRT to take our image in a working space, which has much more color volume, much more dynamic range than our display does. And we're saying, hey, DRT, fit this large volume of image into a smaller container. The trade-offs, the prioritization, the subjective decisions that are being made in order to do that is why we are seeing differences between, for example, ACES 1.3 and ACES 2.0. Every DRT is going to solve that challenge of how do I get more color onto the screen than my screen will allow. Each DRT is going to solve that a little bit differently. It's going to have different priorities. It's going to have different philosophies driving it. So the DRT is actually not neutral, even though it is sort of easy to think of it as our technical component. It's actually a living, breathing thing, and the way we select it, it's not academic. It actually has a direct impact on our image itself and on the starting point that we have for our image, okay? So that's number 2. DRTs are not neutral. They're not just technical. There's more to them than that. Here's what's next. DRTs determine your grade. So let's actually look at 2 other DRTs now. We're going to look back at Resolve Color Management here, and we are going to compare it to another DRT called 2499. First of all, just as another illustration of the significance of a DRT, look at the difference between these renderings. These are very different pictures, right? It's not just a question of like, oh, there's a bit more contrast or it's a bit more saturated or whatever. It's completely different renderings of the image, right? Again, you can't exactly say either is dead wrong. It's just a question of what is being prioritized in which and which one you prefer for your particular image, for your particular project. But what I want to highlight here is not only the difference, which we've already talked about, but the fact that these 2 different base renderings, they're going to determine my grade. They're going to determine what I do in my grade. They're going to determine the way my grade feels. Check this out. I'll give you the example. If I'm in Resolve Color Management right now, and I go over to begin grading this shot because I've chosen Resolve Color Management as my DRT, the first work that I'm going to have to do in front of me is I'm going to be trying to figure out how do I get some more like separation and variance into this image. Like it just feels like she's been kind of like hit with like Smurf blue, just in it with a bucket of paint, right? Like I know this image has like that strong wash to it, but I want to see some differentiation from shadows to midtones to highlights. I want to see a little bit more of an image that has some kind of contrast into it that my eye can hook into, because that's really absent right now. So I'm going to end up working my primaries toward that goal as best I can anyway. This is also interesting because it's not that easy necessarily to overcome the deficiencies in your DRT or the things you want that your DRT isn't giving to you. But let's say we're going to do something like that to try to get like a little bit more contrast out of the deal. Let's actually go down a little bit like that. And then I'm going to go over here to my balance node and see if I can balance away from that blue and get a little more separation in there. So you guys can start to see like just getting a little bit more variance and color or contrast in general, I should say, into this image. But my point is not what I'm doing, it's that I have to do it. It's that the DRT I chose is informing and shaping my grade, both like what I'm doing and how easy it is for me to get where I'm trying to go. Follow what I'm saying? Let's reset this for now. Let's go back over to our timeline level for a moment and look at another DRT. So instead of RCM, Resolve Color Management, if I do 2499, another form of DRT, do you see how the highlights, especially like on her key side over here, they separate out better. They don't just feel like the same going all the way from her eye down to the bottom of her chin. There's some more variation. There's some more contrast, some more separation happening here at my base than with Resolve Color Management. That's going to change the decisions that I make when I grade. That's going to change how much grading I have to do, right? It's going to change how difficult or easy it is for me to get where I want to see this image go. So even setting aside my personal preference for getting a little more separation, a little more like legibility to the image, if this is what you want, then this would be a better point to start. But if this is what you want, this would of course be a better point to start. So your DRT doesn't just set your foundation, it actually determines your grade and your grading decisions. Okay, let's take a look at another one of the things that we want to understand about DRTs to use them well. This one's, again, going to be kind of slippery, difficult conceptually, but stick with me. You guys are going to get this. DRTs are not the same thing as color management. They're not just a part of your color management. We've actually already seen examples of that throughout our conversation today, because I keep flipping between different DRTs, but I'm not changing my working color space. I'm not changing the way I'm input mapping from my camera color space to my working color space. I am simply hot swapping my DRT at the end of the pipeline. So the way to think about this is that DRTs can be used variably, expressively, creatively. You can choose your DRT based on what's going to work best for your project and your project's needs. You are not obligated to use a resolve color management, or rather a CST, if you're grading in resolve color management, or if you're grading in ACES, you're not obligated to use an ACES ODT, which is what they call their DRT. You can use a different DRT for any color management framework that you're in. And as long as you're doing it soundly and teeing up your image into the right color space for the DRT that you're using, that's a variable that you can play with. That's a really powerful variable to play with in terms of how quickly and how effectively you can get where you're trying to go in your color grade itself. Let me give you some examples of this. So here's example number one. Take a look at this image, and let's look at it through this rendering, which I really like. It's kind of moody, it's kind of heavy, but like this feels great. If I was just grading this in a vacuum and wanted to take it a particular interesting direction, I might start with this. But here's the challenge that comes up for me all the time as a professional colorist. I'm working with a client. They shot this image. They lived with this image on set. They were monitoring this image. They went through editorial with this image, and this image didn't look like this when they were going through those processes. This image was being transformed through their manufacturer LUT. That manufacturer LUT was effectively functioning as their DRT, right? That's what was getting them technically transformed from camera space out to display space, okay? So if my client walks in for our first session and I put this image on the screen, they're going to rightly ask, where's my image? That doesn't look right. That's not what I've been looking at for the last 2 weeks or 2 months. It looks different, right? So in this case, I'm going to utilize my ability to hot swap DRTs in order to align with my client's creative context. Well, what does that mean? That's a fancy way of saying I'm going to show them what they've been seeing. So check this out. If I flip in between this rendering, which I like, but which is going to be a bump to my client, I'm going to flip to this rendering, which is literally using the LUT that the camera manufacturer publishes to give me my baseline, right? And then from here, we can shape things. Like I've already got this look in play, and I can refine this look. I can grade the images, of course, whichever way we want to go. But in this case, I am using my knowledge of DRTs and my library of DRTs to establish a common starting point for me and my client so that we don't have to start with work in front of us. Like if my client comes in and they're looking at this, guaranteed first part of the session, even if they don't know they're doing it, we are going to spend the first part of that session grading the image to look more like what they're used to seeing, which is going to mean, oh, we got to expose it up and lower some contrast. And now we're not building, we're correcting, we're fixing things. Okay. So that's one example. All right. Next example. Here's a scenario where I've got a lot of warmth in the image. Okay. Let's go to a rendering that's going to really help exemplify this. There's a lot of warmth in the image, because I've got quite a bit of skin tone. I've got some warm colors in wardrobe. And it also looks to me like the color temperature of the light is warmer than the color temperature the camera was rated for. So this is a particular type of scenario that will just come up in certain projects. And different DRTs will do a better or worse job of handling this particular scenario. So this DRT, even though I happen to really like this DRT and use it all the time, in this case, it's not quite right because it's exaggerating that warmth. It's exaggerating it and making it feel almost kind of like ruddy to my eye. It's like too low in color separation. And I just don't like the way that it's handling skin and kind of like washing the image into that warmer area. What it's going to cause me to do is have to do more balance at the shot level. And that's kind of going to be my first move on this shot. Or let's say this is a whole scene or the whole movie looks like this. My first move is going to be again and again and again to just cool things off and move it out of that vector. But if that was the client's creative intent, they wanted to rate the camera cooler than the light source of the scene, this might be a situation where I'm creating more work that they don't want me to do that could all be avoided by selecting a different DRT. Check this out. So here is my current DRT. Here's an alternative DRT. It's not better or worse, but we can probably all agree this doesn't have that same feeling of being overly ruddy, overly saturated in the skin tones. It doesn't feel as excessively warm, to my eye anyway, as it did here. Can you see what I mean? Feels a little too warm here. Feels more fundamentally balanced here, even though it is still quite obviously biased warm, that presence of a mismatch between lighting and camera rating is still there, but there's something about it that feels like a more functional baseline that I'm not going to have to steer away from the moment I land on the shot when I'm grading. Okay. So this is just an example of using my library of DRTs, my knowledge of DRTs, my knowledge of the fact that I can freely exchange one DRT for another as long as the color spaces are being aligned properly to get a stronger base for my project than I would have had by just sticking with the first DRT that I am given, or the only DRT that I'm aware of that I even can use. Okay. So again, this is just driving this point home that DRTs are not equal to color management. DRTs are a part of color management, but they are a variable part, and they are the only part of your color management that has direct impact on the aesthetics of your image. Okay. Let's look at one more example. We talked earlier about single step versus two-step printing processes, or if we talked about two-step printing processes. We're now going to talk about a single step printing process. Okay. Remember I said, in most modern color managed workflows, we are typically going to have a print process where we have two components. We have a fundamentally creative component that's coming from our look, and then we have a fundamentally technical component that's coming from our DRT. Even though we now know that it's not as cut and dry as that, those are the sort of general buckets that those two components belong in, and really all that matters is the way they combine to form our print. So that's typically what we're going to see. And if we look at our base for this image, we could go with something like this. Like here's our resolved color management plus our look. It's a nice rendering of image. This is a two-step print as we've been working with throughout our conversation today. But here's another way that we can leverage DRTs, our understanding of them, our ability to freely hot swap between them, and the library of DRTs or prints that we start to avail ourselves of now that we understand the way that this thing works. Okay. So in this case, I want to go for like a film rendering, like explicitly a film look. There's lots of ways to go about that. I could use a scene referred film look and slot it in here, something like my Kodak 2383 LUT that works in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. But in this case, with what I understand about DRTs, and just as important, what I now understand about the concept of the print, the thing that gets me from my graded image out to a viewable image, I'm going to go a different path. I'm going to do a single step print using a trustworthy film LUT. Check this out. So we're going to go from our resolved color management to a film LUT, like so. Once again, I want to emphasize, like, to me, this conversation is not really about which one is objectively better or worse, or which one you prefer or I prefer. It's more about the difference and about the difference in starting point that we're getting with one versus the other. And in this case, if we wanted this film look, this would be a great place to start for a film look. It's a well-built LUT, and it's giving me the ideal foundation for pushing a film look even further, even though it is a non-traditional way of getting our print. And the reason I know that I can get it this way is because of my larger understanding of the print as a concept and of the way the DRT fits into this. So what we have right now is a print where our DRT and our look are just living in one box. Does that make sense? Like I can't untangle the creative from the technical component of this print. It's just a thing that does a thing, which is the original idea of a print. That's why I prefer that term, is to help us remember that even when we are separating things out into a look and a DRT, it's really just one thing that we are separating out for ease of workflow, or so that we can focus on more of the technical or more of the creative. But ultimately, it's just one thing. And when we use a print LUT, we can see, or a film LUT, I should say, we can see just how true that is, because I've got a single step print here that's doing everything I need my DRT to do, and it's doing a great job. So this is an example of being empowered to do things a little bit differently than you might normally think to do, or might a bit differently than others might be doing it, because you now understand the concepts of print and DRT on a deeper level. So this is just a couple of examples of the way you can start to leverage the power of DRTs and your understanding of the print as a concept when you're grading in order to get to better results more quickly and establish a better foundation for yourself to grade the strongest possible final image. Okay, we covered a lot of ground in this video, but at a top level, there's really just two things I want you to take away from the conversation. Number one, your image becomes an image. It is formed by your print. And in a two-step printing process, your DRT is the most important part. Number two, you can learn all the color grading technique in the world. You can become the very best colorist that you're capable of becoming. I hope that you do. I hope I can support you with that here on the channel if that's your goal. But with every project that you take on, you are going to be lowering or raising the ceiling of what your best possible work looks like based on your selection of your DRT. That's why it's so important to understand the concepts that we broke down today and to start mindfully selecting your perfect DRT for every project that you take on so that you can set that ceiling as high as possible.